Lana sat on the wet asphalt with bleeding knees and a cracked phone discarded by her in-laws like expired milk. Having stripped her of her home, her dignity, and her late husband's name, they left her to the mercy of the unforgiving rain. With only one option remaining, she typed 4 words into a burner number she had sworn never to use. 10 minutes later, the most dangerous man in the city pulled up to the gates. The marble floor of the Sullivan foyer was notoriously cold. Lana knew this because she was currently pressed against it, the side of her face resting on the pristine veins of grey stone. Her jaw throbbed where one of the private security contractors had backhanded her. "Get her up," Arthur Sullivan said. His voice didn't rise above a conversational hum. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, looking at Lana with the mild annoyance of a man who had just discovered a rat in his wine cellar. 2 pairs of hands hauled Lana to her feet. Her knees wobbled. She was still wearing the black dress from Leo's funeral. The fabric was stiff, unyielding, smelling faintly of the lilies they had piled onto his closed casket just 48 hours ago. Leo was dead. A convenient car accident on a winding cliffside road. No witnesses. No surviving spouse benefits either if his parents had their way. "You're making this exceedingly difficult, Lana," Beatrice Sullivan said. She stood near the grand staircase, sipping scotch from a crystal tumbler. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice and old money. "Sign the renunciation. You walk away with nothing, which is precisely what you brought into this family." "It's poetic, really." Lana spat a small wad of blood onto the marble. It was a petty victory, watching Beatrice flinch at the stain, but it felt good. "Leo left me the house. He left me his shares. You think a judge won't ask questions when the grieving widow is entirely written out, 2 days after his funeral?" Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, scraping sound. "A judge will see a forged will drafted by a hysterical gold-digging nurse who manipulated our son in his final months. Mr. Finch has already filed the genuine paperwork, the one where Leo realized his mistake and left his estate to the Sullivan Trust." Mr. Finch, the family lawyer, stood in the shadows near the door, clutching a leather briefcase. He didn't meet Lana's eyes. Nobody in this house ever really looked at her except Leo. And Leo was in the ground. "I won't sign," Lana said, her voice raspy. Arthur sighed, a father disappointed by a slow child. "I was hoping to avoid a scene, but you've always been thoroughly middle class in your theatrics." He nodded to the guards. "Take her rings, then throw her out." Panic sharp and metallic finally spiked in Lana's chest. "No, don't touch me!" The guards didn't hesitate. One pinned her arms behind her back, twisting her shoulder until white-hot pain shot down her spine. The other grabbed her left hand. He didn't bother being gentle. He yanked at her engagement ring, a massive, gaudy diamond the Sullivans had insisted Leo buy for appearances, and then went for the simple gold wedding band she had picked out herself. "Leave the band!" Lana gasped, thrashing against the grip. "Please, keep the diamond! Leave the band!" "Sullivan heirlooms belong to Sullivans," Beatrice stated. The guard tore the gold band over her knuckle, scraping the skin raw. Lana squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't cry. Crying was a currency the Sullivans thrived on, and her accounts were empty. "Her bags are on the porch," Arthur said, turning away. He was already bored. "If she steps foot on the property again, call the police. Tell them a trespasser is harassing us. If she speaks to the press, ruin her. If she finds a lawyer stupid enough to take her case." He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Well, accidents happen on those cliff roads every day." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They marched her to the heavy oak front doors. Outside, a torrential downpour lashed against the estate. The wind howled, rattling the glass panes. "Have a good night, Mrs. Sullivan." One guard sneered, opening the door. They shoved her, hard. Lana stumbled out onto the covered portico, her heels slipping on the wet slate. She crashed down the front steps, tearing the knees of her stockings and scraping her skin against the gravel driveway. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, the deadbolts sliding into place with a definitive hollow echo. She was outside. The rain instantly plastered her black dress to her skin, freezing her to the bone. Lana pushed herself up on her hands. Beside her in the gravel lay a single black trash bag. They hadn't even packed her suitcases. They had just swept her meager belongings, some clothes, a pair of sneakers, a framed photo of her and Leo, into a garbage bag. She knelt in the mud and the driving rain pulling the bag toward her. She felt numb. It wasn't the cold. It was the absolute crushing reality of power. The Sullivans had the police, the judges, the banks. She had $30 in her checking account and a bleeding knuckle where her husband's ring used to be. She dragged the bag down the long, winding driveway. The iron gates of the Sullivan estate loomed ahead, securely locked. She had to slip through the pedestrian side gate, which clicked shut behind her, locking her out permanently. Lana collapsed onto the wet curb of the affluent, empty street. Streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow through the sheets of rain. No cars passed. It was a gated community. The wealthy didn't go out in weather like this. She pulled her knees to her chest, shivering violently. Her jaw ached. Her shoulder burned. She was utterly alone, entirely erased. Lana sat on the curb for a long time. She watched the water rush down the gutter, carrying dead leaves and debris toward the storm drain. It was a fitting metaphor, though she was too cynical to appreciate the poetry of it. She dug into the pockets of her soaked coat. Her fingers brushed against a piece of plastic. She pulled it out. It was her cell phone, the screen fractured into a spiderweb pattern from the fall down the stairs. Miraculously, it still held a charge. She stared at the shattered glass, wiping the rainwater off with her thumb. She could call the police and say what the billionaires who owned the precinct threw me out of their house. She could call a friend. What friends? The ones Beatrice systematically alienated over the last 2 years. She had a sister in Ohio, but a bus ticket cost money she didn't have, and the Sullivans would simply freeze whatever assets she tried to touch. Arthur wasn't joking about the cliffside accidents. If she fought them legally, she'd be dead before the deposition. Her thumb hovered over her contacts. It scrolled past the A's, the B's, down to the H's. It stopped on a contact saved simply as DH. Lana closed her eyes. The memory surfaced, sharp and antiseptic. 3 years ago, she was working the graveyard shift at St. Jude's ER. It was 3 a.m., the hour when the city's worst secrets bled into the hospital. A man had walked through the ambulance bay doors. He didn't come in an ambulance. He walked in, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who looked ready to execute the triage nurse. The man in the center was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a cashmere coat completely ruined by the blood pouring from his abdomen. He hadn't spoken. He had just looked at Lana, who was standing behind the desk. His eyes were dark, devoid of panic, radiating a cold, terrifying authority. The hospital went into lockdown. The suits demanded a doctor, no records, no cops. The on-call surgeon froze, stammering about protocols. Lana hadn't frozen. She was pragmatic. A man was bleeding out. She bypassed the red tape, shoved the surgeon out of the way, and got the man into trauma room 1. She clamped the artery herself, while the doctor hyperventilated. She didn't ask questions. She didn't log his name into the system. She just worked her hands, slick with his blood, until the bleeding stopped. When he woke up hours later, in a private room, Lana had been checking his vitals. "You didn't call the cops," he had said. His voice was like gravel scraping over iron, deep, quiet. "Cops make paperwork," Lana had replied, checking his IV. "I hate paperwork." He had studied her, not with gratitude, but with calculation, assessing her worth, assessing her risk. "What's your name?" "Nurse Gallagher," she said. "Lana," he corrected, reading her badge. He reached into his coat pocket, the coat draped over the chair, and pulled out a sleek black card with nothing but a phone number embossed on it. He held it out to her. "I don't take tips," she had said. "It's not a tip. It's a debt," he replied. "Brennan Hayes pays his debts. You need something. Anything. A problem goes away. A door opens. You call this. Once. Then we're even." She had taken the card. She knew who Brennan Hayes was. Everyone in the city knew. He wasn't a gangster who wore flashy suits and shot up restaurants. He was the undercurrent of the city. He owned the shipping yards, the unions, the judges that the Sullivans didn't. He was a ghost who commanded an army. She had programmed the number into her phone and burned the card. She told herself she would never use it. Getting involved with the Hayes Syndicate was a different kind of death sentence, but sitting here now, shivering on the curb, tasting her own blood, the calculus changed. The Sullivans thought they owned the world. They thought they were the predators, and she was the prey. Lana didn't want justice anymore. Justice was a fairy tale for people with money. She wanted survival, and maybe a tiny dark part of her wanted revenge. She tapped the contact. DH. The screen flickered. The rain dripped onto the glass, registering as phantom touches. She shielded the phone with her body, opening a blank text message. "What do you say to a Mafia boss? Help me, I'm stranded. Too pathetic." She typed carefully, her fingers stiff from the cold. "I need a door opened." She stared at the words. It felt insufficient. She deleted it. She needed him to know it was her. She needed him to know the severity. She typed St. Jude's ER, calling in the debt. She hit send. The green bubble popped up. Delivered. Lana dropped the phone into her lap and put her head in her hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. It was a stupid idea. 3 years had passed. He probably changed his number. He probably didn't remember her. Even if he did, why would he drive out to the affluent suburbs in a monsoon for a widowed nurse? 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 7 minutes. Lana laughed softly, a bitter, broken sound that carried down the empty street. "Stupid," she muttered. She grabbed the black trash bag, intending to start walking. Maybe she could find a gas station. Maybe she could sleep in a bathroom stall. Crunch. Footsteps on the gravel behind the iron gates. Lana turned her head. Through the wrought iron bars, she saw the 2 Sullivan security guards walking down the driveway, shining heavy-duty flashlights through the rain. "She's still here," one of them called out. "Mr. Sullivan said if she was still on the street, we should encourage her to leave the neighborhood entirely," the other said. The beam of the flashlight hit Lana directly in the eyes, blinding her. "Looks like you need some encouragement, sweetheart." They approached the gate. A set of keys jingled. They were coming out. Lana scrambled backward, her hands slipping in the mud. She couldn't fight 2 grown men. She barely had the energy to stand. "Leave me alone. I'm off the property. This whole street is the property." The first guard laughed, sliding the key into the pedestrian gate lock. The metal groaned as it swung open. Lana braced herself, curling her body defensively. Suddenly, a low mechanical growl cut through the sound of the rain. It wasn't a sports car. It was the heavy, deep rumble of a massive engine. The guards paused, looking down the street. High-beam headlights pierced the darkness, blindingly bright. They weren't yellow streetlights. They were harsh, pure white LEDs. A sleek black SUV, rounded the corner. It didn't slow down over the speed bumps. It surged forward like a shark cutting through water. And it wasn't alone. A second black SUV followed. Then a third. The convoy of identical vehicles slid to a halt right in front of Lana, boxing her in against the curb and shielding her from the guards. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. The engines idled, a synchronized, menacing purr. The guards took a step back, their flashlights dropping. The arrogance drained from their posture instantly. They were private security. They knew exactly what heavily tinted armored SUVs rolling in a pack meant. The back door of the middle vehicle opened. The first thing that emerged into the rain was a black umbrella, snapping open with a sharp, violent thud. The man holding it stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch at the torrential downpour. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator. Brennan Hayes hadn't changed in 3 years. He was still tall, broad, and built like a brick wall, wearing bespoke tailoring. He wore a dark charcoal suit, the jacket unbuttoned, revealing a subtle grey waistcoat. His dark hair was neatly styled, his jaw sharp and dusted with the shadow of a beard. But it was his eyes that Lana remembered perfectly. Cold, dark, and utterly dead to the world around him. He stood by the open door of the SUV, the umbrella shielding him. He didn't look at the guards. He looked down at the curb. He looked at Lana. She was a wretched sight, soaking wet, bleeding, sitting in the mud next to a trash bag. She stared up at him, her chest heaving, the rain mingling with the blood on her face. For a long second, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavier than the storm. Then Brennan shifted his gaze. He looked past Lana toward the 2 guards, standing frozen by the open iron gate. "Are those yours?" Brennan asked. His voice was exactly as she remembered. Quiet. Gravel over iron. He didn't yell to be heard over the rain. He just spoke, and the world seemed to quiet down to listen. Lana swallowed hard. "No." Brennan gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. The front doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out. They didn't carry umbrellas. They were large, quiet, and moved with military precision. They didn't draw weapons, but the way they walked toward the gate made it abundantly clear that weapons were unnecessary. "Hey, wait," the first guard stammered, holding up his hands. "We're just doing our jobs. Private property." The 4 men didn't reply. They just kept walking. The guards realized their mistake too late. They turned to run back toward the estate, but Brennan's men were faster. There was no shouting. There was just the sickening sound of a fist connecting with bone, a wet thud as a body hit the gravel, and a muffled groan. Lana flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. When she opened them a second later, both guards were on the ground inside the gate. Brennan's men simply stood over them, impassive, waiting for further instructions. Brennan hadn't even watched the violence. His eyes had remained entirely on Lana. He stepped forward, crossing the distance between the SUV and the curb. He stopped right in front of her. His expensive leather shoes were practically touching her ruined stockings. He crouched down, bringing the umbrella over her head, cutting off the relentless beating of the rain. The sudden absence of the freezing downpour felt like a shock to her system. Lana looked at him. Up close, she could see a faint white scar on his neck, disappearing under his collar. "You look like hell, Nurse Gallagher," he said softly. "It's Lana," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "And it's Mrs. Sullivan now, or it was." Brennan's gaze dropped to her left hand. He saw the torn skin, the bruised knuckle, the missing rings. A muscle in his jaw feathered. It was the only micro-expression he allowed himself, but it spoke volumes. "Who did that?" he asked. "My father-in-law, Arthur Sullivan." Lana took a shaky breath, forcing herself to hold his gaze. She couldn't show weakness now. Not to this man. "They threw me out. They took everything. They said if I fight them, I'll have an accident. Brennan's dark eyes stared into hers. He was reading her just like he had in the ER, weighing the situation, calculating the angles. The Sullivans were powerful, legitimate billionaires. Crossing them meant corporate warfare police, scrutiny, political blowback. I have nothing, Lana said, her voice cracking for the first time. She hated herself for it. I have absolutely nothing to pay you with. The debt was for a favor. I didn't mean to drag you into a war. Brennan reached out. His large hand, warm and calloused, brushed a wet strand of hair out of her eyes. The gentleness of the gesture was so at odds with the brutal efficiency of the men standing just a few feet away that it made Lana's breath catch. I decide what a debt is worth, Brennan said. He stood up, shrugging off his charcoal suit jacket. He draped it over Lana's shoulders. The heavy wool was radiating his body heat, smelling of rain-expensive cedar cologne and something distinctly metallic. He offered her his hand. Lana looked at it. Taking that hand meant crossing a line. It meant stepping out of the brutal but predictable world of the Sullivans and into the shadows of the Hayes Syndicate. There were no laws where he operated, only loyalty and blood. She placed her bruised hand in his. His grip was firm, pulling her effortlessly to her feet. Her legs buckled slightly, but he caught her elbow, steadying her against his side. The bag, Lana mumbled, pointing to the black trash bag in the mud. My things. Brennan glanced at one of his men by the gate. The man immediately jogged over, picked up the wet trash bag as if it contained crown jewels, and placed it gently into the trunk of the lead SUV. Brennan guided Lana toward the open back door of his vehicle. The leather interior was warm, dimly lit, and smelled of rich upholstery. "Where are we going?" Lana asked, hesitating, just before stepping inside. Brennan looked back at the sprawling, lit-up mansion of the Sullivan estate sitting at the top of the hill. His eyes narrowed slightly, a cold promise settling in his stare. "To get you a drink," Brennan said, his voice smooth and deadly. "And then we are going to take back everything that belongs to you." He ushered her into the SUV and closed the door, sealing her inside his world. The convoy engines revved in unison, turning away from the estate, disappearing into the storm. The drive was a blur of neon streaking across rain-slicked glass. Lana kept her eyes focused on the partition, separating the back seat from the driver. Brennan sat beside her, silent, a solid mass of heat in the chilled air conditioning of the SUV. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't ask if she was okay. He treated her silence not as a fragility that needed coddling, but as a boundary he respected. The convoy descended into the subterranean parking garage of a brutalist high-rise in the financial district. The concrete pillars were thick, the lighting industrial and harsh. A private elevator waited at the end of a cordoned-off row. "Come on," Brennan said, stepping out. Lana clutched his oversized jacket closer to her chest and followed. The elevator ride was fast, the numbers ticking up to the 62nd floor, making her ears pop. When the doors slid open, there was no foyer, no greeting staff. They stepped directly into a sprawling, open-concept penthouse. It wasn't ostentatious like the Sullivan estate. The Sullivans decorated with 17th-century portraits and imported marble to prove their pedigree. Brennan's space was sharp edges, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering grid of the city. It looked less like a home and more like a command center for a ghost. "Wyatt," Brennan called out. A man appeared from a side hallway. He wore a rumpled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a map of faded tattoos. He took one look at Lana, muddy, bleeding, shivering beneath Brennan's jacket, and his face remained entirely neutral. "Get a med kit and find some dry clothes, something small," Brennan ordered. "Right away," Wyatt said, disappearing as quickly as he arrived. Brennan guided Lana to a low, charcoal-coloured sofa. "Sit," she sat. The leather was soft, sinking slightly beneath her weight. She felt absurdly out of place, leaving damp, muddy smears on the expensive furniture. Brennan walked to a wet bar built into the wall. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy glass and brought it to her. "Drink," he instructed. Lana took the glass. Her hand was shaking so badly, the ice clinked violently against the crystal. She brought it to her lips and swallowed. The whiskey burned like a localized house fire all the way down her throat, but it jump-started her heart. The shivering began to subside. Wyatt returned, setting a metal first aid case on the glass coffee table alongside a neatly folded pile of black sweatpants and a grey t-shirt. "Shower is down the hall, second door on the left." "I can do the hand," Lana rasped, setting the empty glass down. She reached for the antiseptic wipes in the kit. "I'm a nurse. I know how to clean a scrape." Brennan caught her wrist. His grip was light, but entirely immovable. "Your hands are shaking, Lana. Let me." She froze. He knelt in front of her, the knee of his expensive trousers pressing into the floor. He didn't ask again. He took an antiseptic wipe, gently isolating her left hand. His thumb traced the raw, bloody skin where the wedding band had been forcibly dragged over her knuckle. "Arthur's men?" he asked, his voice low. "His security," she corrected, wincing as the alcohol stung the wound. "He wanted the Sullivan heirlooms. The engagement ring was his mother's. The wedding band. Leo and I bought that together at a pawn shop when we eloped. Arthur had them take both." Brennan's jaw tightened. He carefully wrapped a pristine white bandage around the knuckle, securing it with tape. His hands were large, prone to violence, yet the application was methodical and surprisingly gentle. 3 years, Lana." Brennan said, his dark eyes rising to meet hers. "You saved my life. I gave you a blank check. I watched you walk out of that hospital every night and get onto a public bus in a dangerous neighborhood. I watched you marry into a family of vipers. Why didn't you ever call—" Lana swallowed hard. The realization that he had kept tabs on her sent a strange shiver down her spine, part fear, part comfort. "Because I thought I could handle it. Leo was good. He was sick, but he was good. I didn't want to bring your world into his. And now Leo is dead." Lana looked down at the stark white bandage on her hand. The cynical exhaustion she had been carrying for 2 days finally crystallized into something hard and sharp. "And I don't want to handle it anymore. I want them to bleed." Brennan studied her face for a long, heavy moment. Slowly the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a phantom smile. It was a terrifying expression. "Go take a hot shower, Lana. Tomorrow we go hunting." The scent of black coffee and burnt toast dragged Lana from a dreamless, exhausted sleep. She was in a guest room dominated by a massive, low-profile bed and minimalist art. She was wearing the borrowed clothes, the sweatpants pooling around her ankles, the t-shirt swallowing her frame. She padded barefoot out into the main living area. The storm had broken, leaving the morning sky a bruised, washed-out grey. Brennan sat at a massive live-edge dining table. He was wearing a fresh black shirt, sleeves rolled up, nursing a mug of coffee. Beside him sat Wyatt, tapping rapidly on a sleek laptop, and a woman Lana hadn't met yet. She was sharp-featured, wearing a tailored blazer over a graphic tee, her blonde hair pulled back in a ruthless bun. "Morning," Brennan said, not looking up from the spread of papers on the table. "This is Chloe. She handles my asset reallocation. I steal things via the internet," Chloe clarified, offering a brief, razor-sharp smile. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan." "Just Lana, please," she said, pulling out a chair opposite Brennan. Wyatt slid a mug of coffee toward her. "Drink up. We're reviewing the board." Brennan tapped a thick manila folder resting in the center of the table. "The Sullivans are old money. Old money means deep roots, but it also means rot. They rely on reputation. Arthur Sullivan's primary venture right now is the acquisition of a tech firm out of Silicon Valley. It goes public in 3 days. If he secures it, his net worth doubles." Chloe spun her laptop around so Lana could see the screen. It displayed a complex organizational chart. "Dossier, Sullivan Trust Vulnerabilities, the Crown Jewel Project, Apex Silicon Valley Acquisition, requires $400 million in liquid capital by Friday. The weak link, Mr. Gregory Finch, family attorney, handles all the illicit paperwork, gambles heavily at an underground club on Tuesdays. The leverage offshore accounts in the Caymans allegedly containing untaxed dividends used to bribe local zoning boards. They threw you out to protect the estate," Brennan explained, leaning back in his chair. "They forged a will to ensure Leo's shares reverted to the trust. If you contest it, they drag it through courts for a decade until you go bankrupt. Standard corporate suffocation." Lana stared at the bullet points. Her mind shifted gears, peeling away the grief and slipping into the analytical pragmatism that made her a brilliant triage nurse. "Finch forged the will," Lana said quietly. "Leo was on heavy doses of hydromorphone the last month of his life. He couldn't even hold a pen, let alone draft a cohesive legal document revoking a previous will." "Can you prove it?" Wyatt asked. "I don't have his medical charts," Lana admitted, frustrated. "They barred me from the hospital wing during his final hours. Arthur brought in a private concierge doctor, Dr. Aris Thorne." Chloe supplied, pulling up a photo of a slick-looking man in a lab coat. "Notorious for writing whatever prescriptions his wealthy clients want." "Leo didn't trust him," Lana said, a memory sparking. She sat forward, planting her elbows on the table. "Wait. Leo knew his father was hovering. He knew Arthur hated me. A week before he died, Leo had a lucid day. He told me he secured a failsafe." Brennan's eyes locked onto hers, entirely focused. "What failsafe?" "A safety deposit box, not at a bank. At the municipal post office, under an alias. He said if anything happened, the key was the only thing that mattered." She looked down at her bandaged hand. The blood drained from her face. "The key. It was welded to the inside of my wedding band. The one Arthur's guard ripped off my finger." The room went dead silent. Brennan slowly lowered his coffee mug to the table. The soft clink sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Arthur has the ring," Brennan stated. It wasn't a question. "He probably doesn't know about the key," Lana said, her pulse quickening. "It just looks like a thick, reinforced band. He took it out of spite." Brennan looked at Wyatt. "Where is Arthur Sullivan this morning?" Wyatt typed for 3 seconds. "Breakfast meeting at the Sterling Club, discussing the final bridge loan for the Apex acquisition with the board of directors. Finch is with him." Brennan stood up. The relaxed, calculating atmosphere evaporated, replaced instantly by the cold, heavy gravity he had carried in the rain the night before. He didn't look angry. That was what made him terrifying. He looked entirely indifferent to the destruction he was about to cause. "Wyatt, pull the cars," Brennan ordered. He looked down at Lana. "Finish your coffee." "Where are you going?" she asked. "To get your ring back." The Sterling Club was a monument to exclusionary wealth. Housed in a heritage building downtown, it smelled of cigar smoke, leather-bound books, and multi-generational arrogance. The waitstaff moved like ghosts, trained never to interrupt the flow of capital being negotiated over eggs Benedict. Arthur Sullivan sat at a round corner table in the private dining room. Mr. Finch sat to his right, furiously typing on a tablet. 3 board members sat opposite them, nodding along to Arthur's measured, confident baritone. "The Apex deal closes on Friday," Arthur said, slicing into a piece of perfectly seared steak. "The slight delay regarding my late son's estate has been entirely resolved. The capital is liquid. There are no loose ends." "And the widow?" one board member asked carefully. Arthur waved his fork dismissively. A momentary lapse in Leo's judgment. She has been removed from the board and the premises. She lacks the resources to mount a legal challenge. You won't hear from her again. The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room swung open. No staff announced the new arrival. In fact, the 2 burly club bouncers who normally guarded the door were visibly absent. Brennan Hayes walked into the room. He was wearing a tailored navy suit that fit perfectly, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He didn't strut. He walked with the relaxed, predatory stroll of a man who owned the floorboards beneath his feet. Behind him walked 2 of his men. They closed the heavy doors with a decisive click, locking out the rest of the club. Arthur looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "This is a private room. Who let you in here?" Finch, however, had stopped typing. The colour drained from the lawyer's face so fast, he looked as though he might faint. He recognized the man. Everyone who operated in the city's grey areas knew the ghost. "Mr. Sullivan." Brennan said, his voice a low rumble that easily carried across the large room. He pulled out an empty chair opposite Arthur and sat down uninvited. "Enjoying your breakfast?" "I am calling security," Arthur snapped, reaching for the small silver bell on the table. Brennan didn't move to stop him. He just watched. Arthur rang the bell. Nothing happened. He rang it again, harder. Security had a sudden shift in priorities. Brennan informed him smoothly. He rested his hands on the white linen tablecloth. "As did your valet, your driver, and the local precinct captain you paid to patrol your gated community." Arthur's eyes narrowed. The arrogance remained, but a sliver of caution finally bled in. "Who are you?" "My name is Brennan Hayes. I'm here representing a mutual acquaintance, Lana Gallagher." Arthur let out a harsh, barking laugh, tossing his napkin onto his plate. "The nurse, of course. She finds herself in the gutter and immediately opens her legs to the nearest thug, willing to play white knight. Listen to me, Mr. Hayes. I don't care what street corner you run. You are entirely out of your depth here. Leave before I ruin you." The 3 board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them slowly stood up. "Arthur, perhaps we should reschedule." Brennan didn't look at the board members. He kept his dark, dead eyes fixed on Arthur. "Sit down." He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. The board member immediately sank back into his chair, sweating profusely. Brennan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet bag. He dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy metallic thud. "Last night," Brennan said, his tone conversational, "your men assaulted my client. They stole 2 rings from her left hand. I want the gold band back." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Arthur sneered. "Those rings belong to the Sullivan Trust." Brennan sighed. It was a soft, disappointed sound. He nodded to the man standing by the door. The man stepped forward, dragging something heavy from the shadows of the hallway. It was one of the security guards from the estate the night before. His face was a swollen purple mess, and his arm was hanging at a deeply unnatural angle. The man dumped the guard onto the pristine carpet. The board members gasped. Finch pressed himself into his chair, trying to become invisible. "He says he gave the rings to you at 2 a.m., Brennan said. Arthur stared at the broken man on the floor. For the first time, genuine fear cracked his icy facade. He looked at Brennan, finally realizing the caliber of the monster sitting across from him. "You're insane," Arthur whispered. You think you can walk into the Sterling Club and threaten me for a piece of cheap gold? I don't threaten Arthur." Brennan leaned forward, entirely invading Arthur's space. The smell of cedar and cold iron seemed to suffocate the table. "You have 30 seconds to put the gold band on this table. If you don't, I will have Chloe wipe your offshore Cayman accounts. Yes, I know about the untaxed dividends. Then I will take Mr. Finch here for a long drive to discuss how one forges a dead man's signature." Finch whimpered. 10 seconds, Brennan said. Arthur's chest heaved. The calculation was visible in his eyes. Pride versus survival. He reached into his breast pocket and produced the simple, scratched gold band. He threw it onto the table. It rolled, stopping against Brennan's coffee cup. "Take it," Arthur spat. "But you tell that gold-digging whore that she gets nothing else. The will is ironclad. She's penniless." Brennan picked up the ring. He held it up to the light, inspecting the thick, reinforced interior, confirming Lana's suspicion. He slipped it smoothly into his pocket. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked down at Arthur with an expression of profound pity. "You misunderstand the situation, Arthur," Brennan said quietly. "I didn't come here to negotiate a settlement. I came here to return a courtesy." Brennan picked up his phone from the table. He hit a single button. "Chloe, burn the Apex bridge loan." Arthur shot up from his chair. "What? No, you can't hack the reserve bank. That's impossible." "I don't need to hack the bank," Brennan replied, turning toward the door. "I just bought the debt, and I'm calling it in, effective immediately. You're short $400 million, Arthur. The Apex deal is dead." Arthur's face turned an ashen, sickly grey. He clutched the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The board members were already frantically pulling out their phones, the panic palpable. Brennan stopped at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. "Pack your bags, Arthur," Brennan said, his voice echoing in the sudden, frantic silence of the room. "You're about to find out exactly what it feels like to be thrown out into the rain." The penthouse was utterly silent when the private elevator chimed. Lana sat on the low charcoal sofa, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the muted television screen, playing the local morning news. A red banner across the bottom read, "Apex Acquisition, Stalls Sullivan Trust Shares. Plummet." Chloe had done her job. The financial bleeding had begun. The heavy door opened, and Brennan stepped inside. He didn't look triumphant. He looked exactly as he had when he left, calm, cold, and composed. He shrugged off his navy jacket, tossing it over the back of a leather chair, and walked straight toward Lana. He didn't speak. He reached into his trouser pocket, pulled out the scratched gold wedding band, and set it on the glass coffee table between them. Lana exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her uninjured hand reached out, trembling slightly, to pick it up. The metal was still faintly warm from his pocket. She ran her thumb over the familiar nick on the edge, a scratch Leo had put there the day they moved a heavy oak dresser into their first apartment. "He just gave it to you?" Lana asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Arthur is a man who understands leverage," Brennan said, sitting in the armchair opposite her. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward. He chose his empire over a piece of spite. Unfortunately for him, he lost both. Wyatt emerged from the hallway, carrying a small black canvas tool roll. He set it down next to the ring and unrolled it, revealing a row of precision instruments, micro-torches, jeweler's saws, magnifying loupes, and fine-tipped pliers. "You said the key was inside the band," Wyatt stated, snapping a pair of latex gloves onto his hands. "It's a thick casting. Looks solid. But there's a seam on the inner rim. Barely visible unless you know what to look for." "Leo knew a guy in the jewelry district," Lana explained, watching Wyatt fit a jeweler's loupe to his right eye. "He paid in cash. Told me never to take it off." Wyatt clamped the ring into a small desktop vise, padded with leather. He ignited a micro-torch, the blue flame hissing sharply in the quiet room. The outer shell is low-carat gold, harder. The inner lining is likely a softer amalgam. If I heat the seam, the solder should melt before the ring warps. Lana watched the blue flame kiss the gold. The smell of hot metal and scorched carbon filled the air. She felt a strange detachment, watching the physical symbol of her marriage being dismantled. But this wasn't destruction. It was an extraction. After 2 minutes, Wyatt killed the torch. He took a pair of ultra-fine pliers and wedged them into the microscopic gap on the inner rim. With a sharp twist of his wrist, a crisp crack echoed. The inner lining peeled away like the lid of a tin can. Nestled inside a tiny hollowed-out trench lay a flat brass safety deposit box key. Wyatt plucked it out with tweezers and dropped it into Lana's open palm. The metal was warm. It looked painfully ordinary. "Municipal Post Office," Brennan said, reading the alphanumeric code stamped into the brass. "Branch 44. That's in the industrial district. 2 miles from here." Lana closed her fist around the key. The sharp edges bit into her skin. "We need to go." The drive to Branch 44 was distinctly different from the ride in the storm the night before. The city was awake, gridlocked in morning traffic. Brennan's SUV navigated the mess with brutal efficiency, the driver taking alleys and service roads. The post office was a relic from the 1970s. Brown brick, fogged glass doors, and the permanent smell of wet cardboard and floor wax. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a sickly rhythmic buzz. Brennan flanked Lana as they walked to the front counter. A bored clerk in a faded blue uniform barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Box 814, Lana said, her voice steady. The clerk glanced at the key in her hand, then at the towering silent man in the bespoke suit standing ominously close behind her. The clerk swallowed, set down his pen, and pointed down a narrow corridor. "Back vault, aisle 4, bottom row." The vault was chilly, the air stale. Aisles of brushed steel boxes lined the walls like a morgue for secrets. Lana found aisle 4. She knelt on the scuffed linoleum, locating 814 just above the baseboard. Her hand shook as she slid the key into the slot. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. She pulled the metal drawer free. It was heavy. Brennan stood guard at the end of the aisle, giving her space. Lana carried the box to a small wooden viewing desk bolted to the wall. She lifted the lid. Inside sat 3 items. First, a thick manila envelope, sealed with red wax. Second, a black USB flash drive. Third, a handwritten letter on plain, unlined paper folded once. Lana ignored the envelope and the drive. She picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Leo's. The ink was slightly smudged in places, written during a time when his hands were already failing him. "Lana, if you are reading this, I am dead, and my father has finally stopped pretending he possesses a soul. I am sorry I didn't tell you the truth. I wanted to keep the rot away from you. You spend your life fixing broken people. I didn't want you trying to fix my family. The envelope contains the genuine irrevocable transfer of my entire estate, notarized by a federal judge outside of my father's payroll. It leaves everything to you. The house, the liquid assets the board seats. But the money isn't why they will try to ruin you. They will try to ruin you because of the drive. 6 months ago, I found a discrepancy in the Apex acquisition funds. Arthur isn't buying a tech company to expand the portfolio. He's buying it to launder $250 million for the Sinaloa syndicate. He's been using the Sullivan Trust as a washing machine for 3 years. Mr. Finch handles the digital transfers. My mother handles the offshore real estate fronts. I told Arthur I was going to the FBI. That night, the brakes on my car failed on the cliff road. I survived, but the doctors said the crash exacerbated my underlying condition. They gave me months to live. I know my father paid Dr. Thorne to over-medicate me, to keep me compliant and quiet until I expired. Burn them to the ground, Lana. Take the drive to the federal prosecutor. Take the estate. Take your life back. I loved you from the moment you yelled at me in that pawn shop. I will love you in the dirt. Leo, a single tear broke free, tracking a hot line down Lana's cheek. She didn't sob. The grief was there, a heavy, suffocating blanket, but beneath it, a dormant volcano of rage finally erupted. Her husband hadn't just died of a convenient illness after a tragic accident. He was slowly, methodically murdered by his own blood to protect a balance sheet. She folded the letter and slid it into the pocket of Brennan's borrowed sweatpants. She picked up the envelope and the flash drive. She turned around. Brennan was watching her. He saw the shift in her posture. The slump of the battered widow was gone, replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. "Did you find what you needed?" Brennan asked. "Yes," Lana said. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "Arthur Sullivan launders money for the cartel. He killed his own son to keep it quiet." Brennan's expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The code of the underworld was brutal, but even monsters had rules. Killing blood for money was a line that commanded a specific kind of violent retribution. "What do you want to do with this?" Brennan asked, nodding to the items in her hand. Lana walked down the aisle, stopping inches from him. She looked up into his dark, calculating eyes. "You said you'd help me take back what belongs to me," Lana said. "I did." "I don't just want the money," she said, her voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I want the house. I want their reputation. I want them to feel the pavement scraping against their knees in the rain. I want them erased." Brennan looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Wyatt," Brennan said into a small microphone on his lapel. "Call the federal prosecutor's office. Tell them we have a delivery. And tell Chloe to initiate the eviction." Arthur Sullivan was screaming at a junior bank executive through his phone when the front gates of the Sullivan estate were breached. He stood in the grand study, clutching a crystal glass of scotch. "I don't care about a freeze. You override the system, or I will personally ensure you never work in finance again." "Do you know who I am?" Outside the window, a line of black tactical vans tore up the pristine gravel of the half-mile driveway. They weren't Brennan's SUVs. They were armored vehicles belonging to the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Arthur dropped the phone. The glass of scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering against the antique Persian rug. Downstairs, the heavy oak front doors didn't swing open to a polite knock. They were violently breached with a steel battering ram. The sound echoed through the marble halls like a bomb detonating. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them." Boots pounded against the marble. Beatrice Sullivan emerged from the formal dining room, wearing a silk dressing gown, her face pale with aristocratic outrage. "What is the meaning of this? I demand to speak to your superior. We are the Sullivans." An agent in a tactical vest didn't blink. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around and slamming her against the flocked wallpaper. "Beatrice Sullivan, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering wire fraud and accessory to murder." Arthur bolted from the study, running for the back staircase. He didn't make it 3 steps. 2 agents tackled him to the floor, driving a knee hard into his spine. The air rushed from his lungs in a pathetic wheeze. Cold steel handcuffs bit into his wrists. "Get off me!" Arthur gasped, his cheek pressed against the cold marble, the exact spot where Lana had lain bleeding less than 24 hours ago. "Call my lawyer. Call Gregory Finch. Mr. Finch is currently in a holding cell downtown, singing like a canary. A calm, familiar voice echoed from the top of the grand staircase. Arthur wrenched his neck upward. Lana walked slowly down the carpeted stairs. She was no longer wearing the borrowed oversized clothes. She wore a sharp, tailored black trench coat over a high-necked slate blouse. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her left hand, wrapped in fresh white bandages, rested on the banister. Beside her walked Brennan Hayes. He moved like a shadow tethered to her side, silent and dominant. Lana. Arthur spat, struggling against the agents. You filthy little rat. You forged documents. You planted evidence. I didn't have to plant anything, Arthur, Lana said, stopping 3 steps from the bottom. She looked down at him. There was no gloating in her eyes, only a cold, clinical detachment. Leo kept receipts, every offshore transfer, every intercepted email to Dr. Thorne. He put it all on a drive and locked it away. Beatrice, pinned against the wall, let out a ragged, hysterical sob. You killed him. You killed my son. Lana turned her gaze to Beatrice. The older woman flinched. Your son died because you cared more about a balance sheet than his life, Lana said softly. He died knowing his parents were monsters. This estate belongs to the trust, Arthur yelled, spittle flying from his lips. You can't take this. We have judges. The judges you bought are currently being investigated by the Department of Justice. Brennan intervened, his voice effortlessly cutting through the chaos. As for the estate, he looked at Lana. Lana pulled a thick, legally bound document from her coat pocket. The red wax seal of the federal court was clearly visible. The genuine will was filed and processed an hour ago, Lana stated. She tossed the document. It landed on the marble floor inches from Arthur's face. The house, the accounts, the shares, they belong to me. This is my property. Arthur stared at the document. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, gaping realization. His legacy, his power, his immunity evaporated in a single afternoon. Take them out, the lead federal agent ordered. The agents hauled Arthur and Beatrice to their feet. There was no dignity left. They were dragged toward the breached front doors. Lana walked down the remaining steps, following them to the threshold. She stood in the doorway, the afternoon sun, casting long, sharp shadows across the portico. Arthur, Lana called out. Arthur, being shoved toward a waiting tactical van, looked back over his shoulder. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked small, he looked old. When you get to lockup, Lana said, her voice carrying clearly across the driveway, tell them the middle-class nurse sent you. The agent shoved Arthur into the back of the van and slammed the heavy metal doors shut. Lana stood on the porch for a long time, watching the convoy of federal vehicles kick up dust as they exited the iron gates. The silence that fell over the estate was absolute. The Sullivans were gone. The rot had been excised. She felt a presence step up beside her. Brennan stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out over the sprawling, manicured lawns. It's a big house, Brennan noted. It's a mausoleum, Lana corrected. She turned away from the driveway, looking back into the foyer. The marble felt different now. It didn't feel oppressive. It just felt like stone. I'm selling it. Every painting, every rug, every acre. The money goes to the oncology ward at St. Jude's. Brennan's mouth quirked into that rare phantom smile. Arthur will likely have an aneurysm in his cell when he hears that. Good. Lana finally let her shoulders drop. The crushing weight of the last 3 days began to lift, leaving behind a profound, aching exhaustion. She looked at her bandaged hand. I owe you. You didn't just open a door. You brought down a fortress. Brennan turned to face her entirely. He didn't step closer, but his gaze was heavy, anchoring her in the space between them. The debt is settled, Lana, Brennan said. You asked for help. You got it. We are even. Lana searched his face. The coldness was still there, the armor he wore to survive in a world of violence. But beneath it, she saw the same recognition she had seen in the emergency room 3 years ago. 2 pragmatic, damaged people who understood exactly how brutal the world could be. "So I just walk away?" Lana asked softly. "You're a wealthy woman now, Mrs. Sullivan. You have a clean slate. You can go anywhere, be anyone." "I don't want to be Mrs. Sullivan," she said. "And I don't run." Brennan remained silent, waiting. "You tore down Arthur's legitimate empire." Lana continued, stepping slightly closer. "But the power vacuum he left behind is massive. The shipping contracts, the board seats the legitimate real estate. Someone is going to swoop in and take it. Someone worse." "That is the nature of the ecosystem," Brennan agreed. "Unless someone takes it first," Lana said. Brennan's eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of genuine curiosity cutting through his stoicism. "You're a nurse, Lana." "I was a nurse," she corrected. "Now I'm the majority shareholder of a holding company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But I don't know the board members. I don't know the players. And I certainly don't have the muscle to keep the wolves out while I restructure the legitimate assets." She held his gaze, refusing to back down. The fear she used to feel around him was gone. It had burned away in the fire of the last 3 days. "I need a partner, Brennan." The silence stretched on. The wind rustled the ancient oak trees lining the driveway. Brennan looked at this woman. She had walked into his hospital, bleeding, stitched him up without blinking, married into a nightmare, survived it, and just orchestrated the complete destruction of one of the most powerful families in the city. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a weapon that had finally figured out how to pull her own trigger. "My world is dark, Lana," Brennan warned softly, his voice a low rumble. "Once you step fully into it, there is no stepping out. It stains your hands permanently." Lana looked down at her left hand. She gently peeled back the edge of the white bandage, revealing the raw red skin beneath. It hurt, but it was healing. The ring was gone. The chains were broken. She looked back up at him. "My hands are already stained. I just want to make sure the right people bleed next." Brennan stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Slowly he reached out. He didn't grab her wrist this time. He opened his palm, offering it to her. "We restructure tomorrow," Brennan said. Lana placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, hot, and unbreakable. 3 months later. The rain returned to the city, slicking the asphalt and reflecting the harsh neon of the financial district. Lana sat at the head of a long mahogany table in a high-rise boardroom. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that mirrored the storm outside. Her hair was cut sharply to her shoulders, her posture impeccable. The bandage on her left hand was long gone, leaving only a faint, silvery scar across her knuckle. Around the table sat 8 men in expensive suits. They were the remaining board members of the former Sullivan Trust, now rebranded as the Gallagher Holding Group. They were sweating. The logistics division in the harbor is bleeding capital. A portly man named Hendricks stammered, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "The local unions are refusing to load the cargo unless we renegotiate the pension plans. Arthur never gave in to them. We shouldn't either." Lana tapped an expensive silver pen against the leather blotter in front of her. The rhythmic tapping was the only sound in the room. Arthur Sullivan went to federal prison because he prioritized a spreadsheet over human beings. Lana said, her voice calm, devoid of the shrill panic these men were used to dealing with. "The harbor workers are the spine of our supply chain. You don't break the spine and expect the body to walk." "But the profit margins," Hendricks started, "are irrelevant if the ships don't move. Lana cut him off effortlessly. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. The room instantly went dead silent. Brennan Hayes walked in. He wasn't on the board, he didn't hold a title on paper, but every man in the room knew exactly who he was, and they knew exactly who stood behind the new chairwoman of the company. Brennan wore a dark three-piece suit, moving with that same quiet, predatory grace. He walked around the perimeter of the table, his dark eyes casually sweeping over the terrified executives. He stopped just behind Lana's chair, resting one large hand on the back of the leather seat. It was a simple gesture, utterly dominant, entirely protective. "Is there a problem with the harbor logistics, Hendricks?" Brennan asked. His voice was a low hum, barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate against the glass walls. Hendricks swallowed so hard it was audible. He looked from Brennan to Lana, finally understanding the true dynamic of the new regime. "No," Hendricks squeaked. "No problem at all, Mr. Hayes. I'll draft the new union proposals this afternoon. We will meet their pension demands." "See that you do," Lana said, setting her pen down. Meeting adjourned. The board members scrambled to pack their briefcases, filing out of the room as quickly as dignity allowed. They didn't make eye contact with Brennan on the way out. When the heavy glass doors clicked shut, Lana let out a long, slow breath. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. "You enjoy terrifying them?" Lana noted a faint hint of amusement, coloring her exhaustion. Brennan moved from behind her chair and sat on the edge of the long table looking down at her. "Fear is a highly effective motivator. But they aren't afraid of me, Lana. They're afraid of you. I'm just the loaded gun sitting on the desk." Lana opened her eyes looking up at him. The dynamic between them had shifted over the last 3 months. It wasn't just a business partnership. It was a gravitational pull. They spent their days dismantling the corrupt remnants of Arthur's empire, and their nights in Brennan's penthouse, poring over ledgers, drinking scotch, and existing in a comfortable, heavy silence that neither of them had ever found with anyone else. There were no flowery declarations. There were no cliché romantic overtures. They were two wolves circling the same territory, slowly realizing they ran better as a pack. "The sale of the Sullivan estate finalized this morning," Lana said quietly. "The money transferred to St. Jude's at noon." Brennan reached out his thumb, gently tracing the faint scar on her knuckle. It was an intimate, grounded touch. "How does it feel?" "Like I can finally breathe," she admitted. She looked at his hand, large and calloused, resting against her skin. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. Brennan's dark eyes locked onto hers. The stoicism he wore like armor cracked just a fraction, revealing a fierce, possessive warmth beneath. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. The scent of cedar and rain washed over her. "You burned the past to the ground, Lana," Brennan murmured, his voice rough. "What are you going to build next?" Lana didn't hesitate. She looked at the man who had pulled her out of the mud and given her the matches. "An empire," she said softly. "Together." Brennan's phantom smile finally broke into something real. It was dangerous, beautiful, and entirely hers. He pulled her up from the chair, closing the distance between them. The rain continued to batter the glass of the high-rise, washing the city clean. The widow was dead. The queen had arrived, and the most dangerous man in the city was standing right beside her. Lana's journey from a bleeding, discarded widow in the freezing rain to the ruthless head of an empire proves one brutal truth: karma doesn't just happen. Sometimes you have to drag it out of the shadows yourself. She didn't just survive her in-laws' betrayal. She dismantled them piece by piece alongside Brennan Hayes. Two damaged people found exactly what they needed in the wreckage. If you loved this slow burn, gritty revenge drama, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves dark romance, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgiving stories.